Hi, Urban. Welcome to the Lives of the Artists. Fantastic to have you.
Hi, good to be here. Thank you.
Now, for the audience, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit and explain maybe a little bit about how you got into art and your background and who you are as an artist? That would be great.
No, I'm Swedish. I was born in Stockholm, 1966, many moons ago, and grew up in a family, academic background, but with some artists in the family. So my mother's aunt was a sculptress. Her husband was a painter, poet, writer, and so forth. And my father was an architect. So, at home there were lots of sculptures and paintings, and at our summer house, which belonged to my mother's aunt, there were the brushes and the paints of this uncle. So art has always been close by. And when we were traveling, I was a young kid, we would go to museums and everything. So art has always been with me from the beginning. And but I was very academic, studied science, was my major at school and so forth. But I always did draw and paint as much as I could. And I, when I did military service, which was then mandatory in Sweden, I was at the Royal Guard in Stockholm. So that enabled me to study art history at the university, half-time. To keep my brain still working during military.
So you studied art history during military service?
Yeah. So I did, in 1 year, I did a half year full time. So, and then after military service, I went interrailing with friends, and I had, I wanted to find an art school where I could go 2-3 months. Before doing something serious.
So how old were you when you finished your military service?
20, I
think. 20, and you sort of had little sort of basic skills in painting and drawing.
Yeah. For example, I was an exchange student in North Carolina when I was 16, 17. And that year I hurt my knees. I couldn't, play the sports for the first months. And school was a lot easier, even though it was a good high school. School was a lot easier than the school in Sweden. So during that year, when I was 16, 17, I did paint and draw a lot. So, then I had more time for it. But anyway, so when I was interrailing after military service, I went with some friends. We went to Florence to see everything, of course, since I just studied that in history of art, but also to see if I could find a school. Since my middle brother, who's an architect now, when he, years earlier, he had taken a watercolor course at the British Institute. So I thought maybe they have longer courses with painting and so forth. So I went there, British Institute. It's a long story, but it kind of shows sometimes how life takes a different road. So I went to the British Institute. The secretary wasn't super nice, but super helpful. But she gave me a brochure with international art schools in Florence, bars in Florence, restaurants, nightclubs, the whole kit. So I bought a map and I made a cross on all the art schools that was listed in this brochure.
And what year was this?
This was summer of '87.
And how many because now it's packed with art schools, Florence. But how many were there back then?
No, back then, most of the places. So I went by all these places. Most of these places are dependences of American colleges,
right?
And so when you go to college in the States, you can have a junior year abroad, and some of them went to Florence, but I went to all these schools. I went to I don't know how many, and I thought they were not very serious. They were mostly hanging around, chatting, and of course. Think it was amazing that you could buy wine everywhere. For these American students, it's a different ball. I didn't really think it wasn't something that it wasn't serious, but I hadn't really been able to define exactly what I wanted. I'd always been interested in painting, figuratively, realistically, but I hadn't really, I didn't know what I was looking for. This long way. Years before internet or anything. But anyway, the last address I went to was the American Church of Florence. kind of strange. It's near.
Urban, can you put your? We can only see half your head. Can you put your laptop? Yeah, that's much better.
Like
that's
that?
great. Yeah, much better.
Anyway, so then I rang the door of the American church in Florence, and out came this very friendly priest with a huge beard. Said, "Hi guys, how you doing? What do you come on in and have a cup of tea or whatever." And so he said, "What are you doing here?" "Well, is there maybe an art school here?" "No, this is a church. It's no art school here." Okay. "So what are you doing? Well, I'm looking for an art school." "Well, have you been there?" "Yeah, I've been there." "Have you been there?" "Yeah, I've been there." Named all these American universities. And then they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't help you." And then all of a sudden they said, wait, maybe I have something. And then he left for 15 minutes. And I was sitting there with my friend. We were ready to get a cold beer after a whole day of walking around in Florence in June. But he came back with a photocopy of a photocopy. Studio Cecil and Graves, classical realism, whatever. And then, of course, the thought goes to your head. This is probably not going to be anything. Or should I go all the way? And I thought, no, shit, I'm going to go all the way. So we walked there, to Borgo San Frediano, walked up the steps, and there was one painter in the back room and working on a still life. He hardly noticed me and my friend when we walked in, because he was so concentrated. And seeing everything that was there, a meeting, I don't remember if it was Charles or Dan, I don't remember anymore. But when I walked in there, I saw what was hanging, saw what the guy was doing, the seriousness. All of a sudden I realized it sort of clicked. So this is what I've been looking for, but I hadn't been able to define it until I saw it. So it's kind of fluke of, destiny or life's path. Because then I asked him, well, can I come and study here? And he said, yeah, sure. When do you want to come? I said, well, January, because I wanted to finish the first year of art history, save money, work, and so forth, to save up money for those 2-3 months. So he said, well, you could come. But do I have to apply? No, just come.
And why didn't you look for something in Sweden? What was drawing you to Florence?
One reason, I think, was I went with my father to New Drawing. It was a new drawing. I don't know how often it was, but for architects. There was a special evening at the Art Academy, because my father had also been at the Art Academy in Stockholm. And I sometimes some artists will come in, a sculptor, and tell all these architects, "Oh, you're all bourgeois, and you're not artists." And what I saw around me, I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to learn something properly, not in this weird atmosphere of I don't know what it was. I guess I just thought it would be interesting to live abroad. I'd lived a year in the States, and so then I went to Florence. So I worked and guided at a museum and finished the first year of art history, and then I took the train to Florence from Stockholm, which is a tiny little train ride, 38 hours, 3 times changing the train.
Through Denmark or around the other way? Yeah.
Copenhagen, Hamburg, Munich, it's a long road. So beginning of January. And then I arrived there, and I just loved it from the beginning. And it went quite well, but I absolutely loved it. So then, after my money was finished, after the first semester in the spring, my money was sort of finished. My father said, well, I can help you. I can lend you money so you can stay until the summer. But of course, my father paid 85% tax in Sweden back then. So it was, it wasn't. And in Sweden, it's not really, well, anyway, I went, I stayed for half a year, and then I went back to Stockholm to study architecture.
Okay.
The first year. And during that year, I painted a lot. I'm from a sort of architect family, so I really enjoyed the studies.
Was there pressure from your father to study architecture? No, it was your choice.
Yeah, it was my choice. My middle brother was then doing the last year of architecture, and I did the first year, and I really liked it, but I was just completely obsessed. I wanted to paint. I even did I hadn't done a portrait in Florence, but I did a portrait of a general, the father of a friend of mine, and yeah, things like that. And then I realized I told my parents around Easter, I said, I have to go back. I have to go. I have to follow my heart. Maybe I'll come back after 3 months and continue my architecture, but I have to go. I have to follow my heart. And
yeah.
My father was completely, absolutely, go for it. My mother said, since her aunt had been a sculptress, she was a bit, but how's it going to be in the future? How are you going to survive? And it's so complicated. I said, well, I'm not thinking about that. I had to, I just have to go now, and then we'll see. So I got some scholarships, and in the end, I also got study loan from the Swedish state, which is very complicated for a private school, but I worked in a museum, and the guy at the museum, one of the directors of the museum, also taught art history in Uppsala and at the university. So he wrote a letter saying that this school is unique and has very high standard. So then I got study loan. So then I felt completely free to continue what I wanted to do without being depending on somebody else.
And how long were you in Florence in the end for training?
It's nearly 3 years, which is short, but when I teach now, I always tell people try to stay more than 3 years. 3 years is minimum. But
I was thinking about time today and being an artist, and how 10 years is really nothing in the career of an artist. Like, you can learn so much, but you can also just only begin, almost only beginning your lifetime of training. It's just it's a
continuous process. But
absolutely,
but I think these first years are extremely important. And then, some people go a whole different direction, and that's fine. But I think the basic training, the training is so unbelievably important. And it takes time. It's very complicated. So,
just the training, the initial training, just to get the fundamentals right, and just And so that eventually led you to painting the Queen of Sweden. How many years later did that happen?
Well, that was quite. So I came. So I had met my wife. She's a restorer. She was studying in Florence at an Italian university. Anyway, last year I was in Florence. She was in Vienna, working at the Belvedere Museum half day as an internship, and then half day at a private restoration studio. So we went back and forth, night trains once a month. Either she came to Florence or I went to Vienna. And she was so 90.
How do you get to Vienna from Florence? Do you go to Venice? You get the train to Venice?
No. It was a direct train. It's a sleeping train.
Oh, sleeping train from Florence.
Stopped for 3 hours in former Yugoslavia, where my wife was nearly robbed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, stuff, but anyway. And so anyway, she was approached by a restorer in Holland that I'd heard about her, and said, if you want to come back to the Netherlands, because she'd lived in London for a year and in Florence and Vienna, if you want to come back to Holland, I have work for you. And I didn't really necessarily want to stay in Florence. I didn't necessarily want to go back to Sweden. I was, up for something new. And Amsterdam, I wanted to copy paintings too. So I thought Amsterdam would be great. Amsterdam was new for her too, because she grew up in the countryside.
Right.
So we went here, and then there was a lot of, quite early I had the commission to paint the Italian ambassador, the portrait, right, which is great. And through him, I had a big exhibition at the Italian Cultural Institute here in Amsterdam. And that was great, because there were lots of people came, and galleries and all that stuff. But the first really, well, I did quite early on. Also, I did the president of the Royal Dutch Academy of Science and Arts.
And how are these commissions happening? Just word of mouth, and just from meeting people, and not much marketing? I mean, because a big thing that people will be, watching, they'll be thinking, how do you get commissions? As a portrait painter, how do you actually get commissions? I mean, in your experience, has it just been being yourself, connecting with people, meeting people, word of mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess people, people, of course, I was quite unique with my education and the way I was painting.
I think there's a huge pressure on artists now to be content creators, with Instagram and whatever the different social media that they they feel that they need to use. There's like a pressure to be this social media person, and that can be very draining and distracting as well from
and I think one seriously important thing is that works painted from life, life size, they don't look that good on small photographs. You have to see the physical object, because everything on that painting is related to the size of the canvas. And if you comprise with a photograph, you don't really get, and the coloring and, everything. It's complicated like that. So that whole thing, internet, of course, didn't start until, I don't know, 2000. I had my first computer in 2001, I think, or 2000 or something like that. So 2003, I had my communication with the galleries in New York via fax and stuff. It wasn't. That's how old I am. No, and the biggest, the first serious commission I got was, I had an exhibition in New York, and I was up on the 6th floor of a bookstore, art bookstore, and I was called from Holland, on my first mobile phone, and they said that the Dutch Prime Minister had chosen me to paint his portrait, the official portrait. So that was amazing. But of course,
what had he seen? What had he seen of you? How did he connect with you?
I think he had seen photographs of my work,
right,
on a portfolio via somebody else who, and of course they were looking, so they had like a commission looking for portrait painters, and then I don't know. I've never asked them actually, but anyway. But of course, getting a commission like that, I was super happy, and dancing on the streets in Manhattan out of joy. But very soon, of course, it's not like winning the lottery. It's a great chance to do something, but if it doesn't become a good portrait, then it's not that positive. So there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And
that was the first big commission, and was them
seriously big commission. Yeah.
Where did you paint the Prime Minister of?
Well, in my former studio, which had beautiful light, but it was quite small, and it was on the 3rd floor in a private house. I just rented that top floor, which was made into a studio by an artist, early on. But the first conversation we had on the phone, he had read that I needed 9 or 10 sittings.
Yeah.
So he was very worried about that. So he said, that seems like a long time. But I always exaggerate the number of sittings. I mean, I don't say 9 to 10 anymore, but I always exaggerate, because the worst thing for a portrait painter is to feel guilty, or that the sitter makes you feel guilty that it takes a long time. The only thing you need is time, and you will get there.
Yeah,
that's why I exaggerated, just to feel more relaxed. And then he says, "Well, can I read the newspaper when I'm posing?" I said, "Well, I don't think the idea of the portrait is of a newspaper reading Prime Minister." So okay, but he loved it, and I always have a mirror behind me, so he can follow the process. And we had super nice conversations. I think he really liked it. He liked the sessions, and once during the session, Kofi Annan, the United Nations ambassador, called via somebody else, and it was fun, because he said, "Well, I don't have time. I'm posing. I can't speak to him." So made me feel very important.
And so that led to a number of important commissions for you.
Yeah, of course, there was a lot of press, quite a lot of press with that, with the unveiling and everything, and the Swedish Queen. That portrait was in 2000. I painted it in 2013,
Right.
This is 12 years ago. And
yeah,
that came about. Actually, there was a Swedish state visit to Holland, and me and my wife were invited at the Swedish residency for, a reception with the king and queen. And the ambassador had bought a painting of mine, and I don't know, but we were invited there. And so I met one of the lady in waiting and spoke to her, whatever. And then months later, and then I had an exhibition in Stockholm at a gallery.
Wait, get back to the Queen of Sweden, because that's an incredible. Yeah. I mean, you're Swedish, so for like, that's, for me, is like painting the Queen. You know, it's the biggest commission you could ever receive. Yeah. Is there much protocol with a portrait commission like that? Did you paint it at the palace, for example?
No. So to get back to this, and then I think somebody from the National Museum came to my exhibition in Stockholm when I wasn't there, and then anyway, when I was teaching actually in Florence in 2012 in the spring, somebody called me from the National Museum and said, this is a secret call. You shouldn't talk to anybody about it. And they said, well, the Queen has needed to be painted already 2 years ago, but all the painters that we have introduced to her, she doesn't like it, or she doesn't want it, and she's quite hesitant to be painted anyway. But it was for the National Portrait Gallery in Sweden, which is the oldest in the world, actually.
Wow.
Not the most important, but the oldest. And then she said, well, we have to sort of convince the Queen to be portraited. So how can we do that? And she asked me, can't you make like a sketch, and send it? And I said, well, how am I going to make a sketch? And I'm going to make a sketch from a photograph. That's not how it works. It's not, it's not going to help. It's not honest. I said, I think it would be better if I would meet the Queen and I can explain how I work and why and so forth. So in that summer, I had a meeting with the Queen and the lady in waiting and a couple of other people.
Was that in Sweden?
Yeah, that was at the palace in Stockholm. But I had just had a serious shoulder operation, so I had my arm in a metella, a string.
Was it your painting arm?
Yeah.
Oh God.
So the head of the lady in waiting, she, I was waiting in the waiting room. She came, picked me up, and she looked at me and said, "Great start." She said.
You need both arms to paint. It's quite difficult to paint with just one arm anyway.
I couldn't paint for 5 months, but after that it was fine. But no, so I had a great conversation with her, and I
you charmed her.
Pardon?
You charmed her.
I tried. No, but I told her that actually we should do a portrait together. I'm not, she has to be involved. I have a mirror, and we choose the dress together, and she can constantly look at what I'm doing. So, and I said, to be able to do a good portrait, you sort of work together. And I think that made her very confident that, I'm not some kind of weird guy who's going to paint her super ugly and then say, well, this is it. And you do it together. So
yeah, it's like a collaboration.
And I told her the sittings are extremely important. I don't work from photographs because this and that. So she said, fine. And then we booked a bunch of sittings. In the end, I think she sat 8 times. And
was it at the palace that you?
Yeah, it was at the palace where they live, which is sort of the Versailles of Stockholm. Half of the palace is where they live, and half the palace is open for the public. So in the winter,
and were you given like a sort of assistant to ask, what do you need? And
yeah, completely. It was unbelievable. I was allowed to walk around in any rooms, in the palace in Stockholm and the palace there at Drottningholm, and I had a compass, check where north light and the highest windows, and it was a great the Chinese saloon, not the Chinese pavilion, but the Chinese saloon, where they have a stove a la chinoise, what's why it's called that. Had very high north light windows, and so I said, no, this would be perfect. And what do you need? Well, I need to cover those windows, I need to cover that window and half this window, and I need, there should be a carpet and a big table, and so forth, and so forth. They asked me, so when I came in, whatever it was, February 2013, everything was perfectly organized, and she would come with a lady in waiting, and then she would leave, and we would be the two of us, and trying to choose the pose and everything, and then it started.
And were you happy with the setup and the room and everything like that? Was it difficult conditions compared to your studio?
No, but you also have to get used to it. But it was good. It had to be a seated portrait,
right?
And not with a long dress, which
Why did it have to be a seated portrait?
It had to be seated. Because the king had been painted standing, and the dress, he wore a suit, so she couldn't wear a long dress, as a forth and so forth. But so it's fine. The photographs are terrible of the portrait, because her dress is red, and it looks so bright red in photographs. But in real, I put in a lot of blues and everything, so it's very much focused on the head. But in photograph, you don't really get that impression of it. So I worked, and the sittings, sometimes there was a state visit, so then there were a lot of sittings I couldn't work, and then I had a stand-in I had to finish the clothes, and then the jewelry, and I worked a lot on the background and other stuff too. But it was it was serious pressure.
Yeah, I'm
during
sure.
The sessions. God. The sessions were so incredibly nice. She's so interested, such a warm personality, fantastic. Really,
did she know a lot?
Amazing.
Did she know a lot about painting?
She's interested in art. I think her uncle had been the organist in where is the church in Germany where Bach was the I don't remember. So she grew up. Her uncle was then the organ player in the church where Bach used to be the organ player. So she loved Bach, and she loved music, and
did you have music on during the sessions?
Yeah.
So did you play Bach during the sessions?
Yeah, a lot of Bach, but also guitar and classical guitar, and I had.
And is there a lot of pressure on those state portraits, those royal portraits? There's a lot of media attention on those portraits in the UK, but there must be the same in Sweden. Was there a lot of pressure at the unveiling, and was there a lot of media attention?
There was media. I was, I think, on the morning after the unveiling, I was live on the national television, and somebody who worked for a friend of mine, and she's like a media expert and has worked at the television. She was sort of helping me a bit to be prepared, and also said, there might be one person who will try to sort of pull you under the rug, pull your feet under, so be prepared, and
well, sort of a reporter, a notorious reporter.
There were two of them, but it went really well, and you just have to think before you answer something.
It's one of those unique experiences, once in a lifetime things, that are just, an amazing thing to experience. I guess a royal portrait as a Swedish man, as well.
And there's media in Holland too.
I'm sure international, but you're painting your queen. It's sort of the highest honor as a painter.
And the nicest thing, the unveiling was at the National Portrait Gallery, which is a medieval castle outside Stockholm, and it was just small group, because there had been a lot of donors for the portrait, donated to the National Museum to have the portrait done, and it was extremely nice, and I spoke. So the head of the National Museum spoke, the head of the collection spoke, and I gave a speech too, which I had worked quite a long time on, but it went well. And so there was. And then it was a reception afterwards. And what was really nice is that we had of course, I had spoken with the Queen about my kids and this and that. And then during the reception, the Queen went up and spoke with my kids, who were pretty young back then. And she kept on, she spoke to them for like half an hour. And, even my wife went up to the lady in waiting and said, yeah, should I, tell the kids to go away? No, she loves it. And then the Queen asked my kids, so how long you been in Stockholm now? No, we've been a couple of days, and we got free from school because of this, and great. And what did you do yesterday? I went to the ABBA museum. The ABBA museum just opened in Stockholm. And she said, oh, but should I tell you that, I love ABBA. And, they played at my wedding. There was a band that played at our wedding, and Dancing Queen, the first time they performed that was at our wedding, and it was written for me, I guess.
That's crazy.
That's very sweet. That was nice.
So how long did the undertaking take from sort of the first sitting to the unveiling?
Yeah, the sittings were quite spread out. Because of state visit, and then there was a princess that had died, so there was a funeral. So there was a long time in between. I think in total I was in Stockholm for 2 months actually, but then I went to Madrid for a weekend for the Van Dyck exhibition. I did whatever, but worked a lot on the background and all of that. But the sittings were quite spread out.
So about 2 months. That's quite quick.
Well, yeah. I don't know. It felt like a long time. But
yeah. No, I'm sure. Intense. Yeah. And so your whole working life, really, you've spent in Amsterdam. Where you've chosen to call home.
Yeah.
And you're in your studio now.
Yeah.
It just looks amazing from the photos and from the background here. It looks amazing. Is this something that you've designed, a studio you've designed yourself, or was it already sort of purpose built? Is it North lit? Tell us about your studio.
No, so this studio, in Amsterdam, the city of Amsterdam has a very good policy. They have old school buildings and stuff that they rent out spaces to artists because they're sort of subsidized. So their idea is they have to try to keep artists being able to live or to work in the center of the town.
That's fantastic. I wish they had that in places like London.
Yeah. But anyway, so my former studio was in a private house. So I knew, I would have to leave because they had a child and, all this stuff. And I couldn't go there in the weekends, and I couldn't,
it was awkward.
Yeah, it was great light, and it was very small. So I had inscribed myself in this foundation, work and live space for artists from the city of Amsterdam. So anyways, you get all these faxes, you get everything, but most of these places are not really fit for what I was doing and painting portraits and stuff. But anyway, and then this came up, and this was something, completely different. But I couldn't go and see it during the viewing days because I had 2 important portrait sessions. My wife biked here and saw it, and she sort of called up and said, "This is amazing. This is it." And then there's you have to apply to be able to rent it, and they called me up and said, you can rent it, and you can get the contract. And the amazing thing is that it's one of the few purpose-built studios in Amsterdam from 19th century and earlier. It was built in 1898 for the then most famous Dutch painter, sort of Breitner he's called, and he was one of the Dutch impressionists.
Breitner, yeah, I know Breitner. I don't know much of his work because there's not much online, but
he's very famous in Holland. Yeah,
some of his stuff's very, very interesting and very chiaroscuro.
Yeah, and quite brutal. I mean, quite rough, some of them, and some of them, But anyway, so this was built for him, and next door, so they own the big builder in Amsterdam. They work for the big architect Kuipers, who designed the Rijksmuseum and the Central Station. The builder, his son wanted to become a painter, and he went to the Academy in The Hague. And when he was finished, the father was still a bit worried about his choice of profession. Probably not the first father in the history of mankind, worried about the son becoming a painter. But anyway, so he had a bit of property here on Prinsen Island, I guess, for his building materials and stuff. So the father got in contact with Breitner and said, I have a piece of property here on Prinsen Island, and I can build a studio for you, and you can help design it. And you just have to pay a little bit of rent, but you have to keep an eye on my son and his progress in his arts. Not as a teacher, but as a
So this is back in 1890 or whatever.
Yeah, 1898. Yeah.
So Breitner designed the studio.
Yeah, or helped design it. Yeah.
Helped design how he'd like it. Yeah. North lit.
So it's got I got 5.5 meters north light windows.
Incredible.
And so I can control the light very well with with curtains and everything. And so it's wonderful, and we live only 5 minutes biking from here.
Perfect.
And it's very center, and it's super quiet. And I have a little garden by the water, and so it is fantastic.
Perfect. And what's a typical day like in your studio? Do you have a routine that you like to do? Is every day different? I mean, do you like to start painting by a certain time? What's a sort of typical?
It depends what I have. Some periods I have a lot of portrait commissions. So then usually portrait session is from 10 till 12:30 or 1, and then the next one from 2 till 4:30 or 5. And I want to be here at 9 because I want to spend time setting my palette up and maybe pre-mix a few colors and tones, and then and also really sit in front of the painting and think, what am I going to do? What is lagging behind? What is
sort of planning for the next day.
Yeah,
planning what you want to do.
A lot of times I do a lot of still lifes too, so it's a bit the same.
So your routine is sort of 10 o'clock in the morning until when the light gets good till about sort of 5 o'clock with a break for lunch.
Yeah.
And what kind of palette do you use? I mean, in terms of the colors, have you come to do you use the Anderson palette? Is there extra colors that you add? What's your preferred palette that you like using?
Well, you mean the skin tone or?
Yeah, skin tone for portrait paintings.
No. So what I have, usually I have like 4 different lead whites on my palette.
Why 4 lead whites?
Well, some thin, some with poppy oil, could be hand ground, but then some, one quite thin and one quite fluid and one stiffer. And then with.
And do you grind the lead white yourself?
Yeah.
And so when you grind them, you actually grind them to different thicknesses.
No, I usually grind it quite stiff, and then I add oil in the morning, and then walnut oil also, more fluid and one stiffer, and then yellow ochre. The yellow ochre that's sort of warmish,
right?
And then vermilion, which is, I used to have fantastic vermilion. Which I've run out of, so I'm sort of mixing different vermilion pigments together to get the kind of chroma that I like.
Which is the fantastic vermilion that you like?
Well, that was a batch from Fase, this restoration shop in Florence, but they don't have any of that anymore.
Oh, shame!
But I bought it in '95 or something, so it lasted for a long time.
Oh wow! Must have bought a lot of it.
Yeah, and then ivory black. Of course, also. Yeah. But I do also have burnt sienna on the palette, and I have red ochre, and I have alizarin crimson.
For the flesh tones, crimson, that's very strong color.
Yeah, but you have to be very careful with it. But
yeah,
you need sometimes for the lips or and I can also use chrome oxide green. I have it on my skin palette if I need to cool down a shadow, for example.
Is that like a viridian or? No. Chrome oxide green is like an olive green. What kind of green is that?
It's a friendly green, which, if I mix, for example, you can make a very beautiful gray mixing chrome oxide green with burnt sienna.
And that makes a gray.
Yeah. and it cool it down. I don't use it. I don't use those other colors very much, but sometimes you need to, especially cooling down some shadows and stuff.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, every artist, when you're deep into your career, or when you're a few years into it, adapts their palette as they go along. I find, and some colors work better with some artists, and I'm constantly adapting my palette. Constantly changing and trying new colors and trying new things, and some things work, some things don't work. But
I think it's important for students to keep it very simple. That's essential.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always amazed at the Andersson palette. It was just these 4 colors that work so perfectly well for flesh tones. But it is helpful sometimes to add other colors into the palette. Of course, especially if you were painting different colors in the clothing and things like that. Have you? I was thinking today. I was wondering about Rembrandt's palette, and have you done any research into the colors that he would be using in his palette? Have you done much looking into that?
Well, I've been studying all that, a lot, but years ago. I mean, we have to realize also that they had a limited palette. They had limited colors.
They had less colors, of course. Yeah.
I mean, I think he used, and you can study. They've done tests, and for example, at the Maurits house, they did the restoration of the Salomon and painting, and that's a late Rembrandt. I haven't read exactly what which pigments they found, but it's all pretty simple. It looks more complicated than it is. I think there are a lot of earth colors in there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of earthy colors that Rembrandt liked to use, but I was just wondering if you kind of had an idea of, obviously these would have changed, but it's lots of browns, ochres, and of course lead white.
Yeah. No, I haven't. And I think it depended also on his economical situation, which pigments he could buy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Unlike Titian, who was always very wealthy and most of his career was wealthy, bought the best
but also
colors.
All the pigments that came to Europe came through Venice too. So it was also it was cheaper there, of course, than anywhere else, and you had the most amount of pigments there from the east and so forth.
Yeah, of course, but I mean, Amsterdam was a similar port like that. It was kind of like a later Venice in a way, very founded on very much the same philosophy and ideology. And there would have been plenty of options available to Rembrandt. But there are art historians that like to sort of posit the idea that, he liked to use these earthy colors because he was in touch with, the real people of the world.
But that's some of those art historians who just might want to make it sound more complicated than it is, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And Urban, do you I mean, you've lived most of your working life, you've lived in Amsterdam, and obviously there's this amazing tradition of the Dutch golden age of painting. Do you feel connected to that? Is that something that you kind of walk through and use as inspiration every day? Or, I mean, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, of course, I go often to museums and so forth, and the Rijksmuseum is a fantastic museum, but it's also limited because it's nearly it's not an old royal collection like you have a National Gallery in London, or other big museums where they collected a lot of different art. Here it's nearly only Dutch art.
Yeah.
In that sense, it's limited, but there are always things you pick up every time you go to a museum. There's something you learn. There's something you see which you probably hadn't seen before, and so I think it never is there sort of a moment that I'm going to do this in a painting or that because I've seen it in this old master painting. I think it's more of an arsenal that builds up in your head, which probably maybe comes out via.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like to sometimes just go. The other day, I just went to have a look at the Caravaggio supper at Emmaus, at the National Gallery in London, and that was the only painting. I just focused on that. I walked in, I spent half an hour looking at that, and I'd been reading, the days before, I'd been reading a lot about it and doing research about it, and then I went to see it. And actually, sometimes I think that's the best way to digest a painting, because if you go and look at too much information, you don't take it all in. Oftentimes you don't take in half of what you're seeing. So that's what I really love to do. That's the privilege as well of the National Gallery is free, so you could just walk in and focus on one painting and then leave. So I like to do that as well. But
no, I'm exactly the same. I don't look at too many paintings. You just, because it's intense and you want to, if you know a little bit about art, you want to really study them for a long time. So it tires your eye and your mind, and you're not, then I usually never spend more than an hour and a half in the museum.
It's amazing, like the more you get to know art history and the more you understand. I mean, it's a real privilege being a painter, because I feel that we look at paintings in a very practical way. How has he dealt with that problem? That's interesting. He's knocked that into shadow, so he's dealt with that hand in this way or whatever. It's a very interesting thing to look at a painting like that, just in it for a practical sense. But also when you understand the history of art and the context of when these paintings were painted, what was going on in history at the time, it becomes so illuminating, to look at these paintings throughout our lives.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
I remember when I went to Amsterdam, I went to Rembrandt's studio, and it's like, wow, I'm here in Rembrandt's studio, the kind of the god of painting. And you walk in and you think, okay, well, it's not that impressive. I mean, I went to Rubens's studio in Antwerp, and his studio really feels like an impressive studio. And I went to Rembrandt's studio, and it was kind of just like a room with not very high ceilings, not very high windows.
Yeah, but the Rembrandt house now, it's, a lot of it is a sort of 19th century kind of construction.
Yeah, so you think
don't
it was
really know exactly.
It was made up. You don't think it's really how it was.
I don't know how much of the interior is original when it comes to his rooms. The rooms are quite small, and the bigger works he couldn't really have painted them there, I think.
But that's what I was trying to work out. I was like, where did he do these bigger pieces? How would he have got them up to, I was looking outside, how in Amsterdam they have the tall sort of doors at the top of houses to put furniture in and things like that, and there's often a hook on those Dutch houses. I was thinking, did he do it like that somehow? But there doesn't seem big enough windows to get big paintings in, so it was kind of unanswered. The questions were unanswered.
No, but I don't think we know exactly what it looked like inside there.
Yeah, it was almost like someone that didn't know too much about painting rebuilt the house.
Yeah, probably.
Because I wish there was just a bit more information on it, but it was amazing to be in the city of Rembrandt. He's such a prominent figure in Dutch, the golden age art, and like you say, the Rijksmuseum is sort of it's like devoted to Rembrandt, really. It's got the most Rembrandt paintings in the world. If you want to go and see Rembrandt, go to the Rijksmuseum. It's
it's amazing, and the whole museum was sort of on the second floor there, the honorary gallery, that's all designed around the Night Watch.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
which is pretty amazing. But it's also sort of it's also part of, in that sense, part of the end of 19th centuries, the national romantic period. Also, these statues of Rembrandt, this romantic idea of him, went bankrupt and went out of fame, and a lot of those stories are not really, they're exaggerated too. It's sort of a romantic view of the lonesome poor artist.
Yeah, well, it's funny how they like to sort of propagate that idea, that story, and also Vincent van Gogh has a very similar story. Is
Yeah,
this just a Dutch tale that Dutch people like to tell
I guess.
themselves about artists?
But yeah, yeah, maybe you know, the undiscovered person. But Rembrandt was famous in his lifetime, and even in the end, you know, after he had gone bust, he sort of went bankrupt because he spent too much money to, you know.
Yeah, overspending.
Yeah, and he had some serious commissions. You know, the Aristotle with the bust of Homer in the Met in New York. That was part of a big commission for this nobleman in Sicily, and that was in the end of his life. So you know, he wasn't completely forgotten or at all.
No, he had plenty of commissions, and he was, you know, there's still late in life that people were visiting his studio, and
Yeah.
he was in great demand. But
Yeah.
obviously, his life, from personal circumstances,
Yeah.
when you know things went badly for him,
Yeah.
he was.
But it's the power. Yeah, I think it's a great lesson for a lot of painters, because he is, due to the power of his paintings, the sort of the sheer sort of spiritual power of his paintings. It's kind of unique in a way, because he's maybe the only painter, you know, old master in the world, who gets away with painting bad hands. For example, some of his hands are really bad, or some of the eyes are, you know, the Jewish bride, her eyes are completely asymmetrical and so forth. But he gets away with it because of the power of his paintings, and that's, I find that quite that's very intriguing. And
it is very intriguing. No, you're right. Sometimes I look at a hand of his and just think, especially his hands. You're right. They're sort of like clubs almost sometimes.
He did know how to paint good. I mean, the anatomy of Dr. Tulp in the Maurits house, which he painted in 1632, which is sort of just when he came to Amsterdam. I mean, Dr. Tulp's, his hands are beautifully painted, so he knew how to do it. But I guess he just didn't find it interesting, or you know.
Yeah, it was almost like that. With that Dr. Tulp painting was very early in his career, and I think he was probably fresh in Amsterdam, very ambitious, and wanted to make an impression. But as you know, as he went through his career, he was probably maybe less interested in getting the hands right. Hands are very, very difficult things to paint.
Yeah, but it's also there's an interesting parallel too, because if you think of Rembrandt's early paintings and you compare it to the late paintings, you nearly think they're made out from different painters. There's so he has sort of nearly 3 periods developments, and they're so unbelievably different. So, and that's fascinating. But you see that a bit with Titian too. You know, compare early Titian with the late Titian. So it's an interesting parallel between those two painters. And you know, Rembrandt was also a great admirer of Titian, because a lot of the paintings went through Amsterdam. Because Amsterdam, we shouldn't forget, was the first place in Europe where they had art auctions.
Yeah, they had a huge art market, and
so he saw a lot of paintings.
And it might explain why he never left Amsterdam, because he just felt like he had seen enough, or he had enough to look at.
There's sort of a quote, you know, I don't know, it's probably just a legend, but somebody asked, you know, why don't you travel to Italy? Say, why should I, when all those great masterpieces come through Amsterdam?
Yeah, it's always intriguing to wonder, you know, what exactly were the reasons why he never left.
I think he was a pretty complicated personality. I think he was seriously intense guy, actually. But I don't know.
I get the impression he was quite sociable. I certainly think he liked to drink. But, you know, when you look at the prodigal son, the early prodigal son, where he has Saskia sitting on his knee, just gives the impression that he loved to, you know, socialize and drink in bars and have lots of beer and things.
Probably, yeah.
Who are some of your biggest influences as artists that you love to look at now and throughout your career?
Well, I mean, Zorn was of course always admiring Zorn, and our summer house is not very far from Zorn, from Mura, where Zorn's house is, and
Anders Zorn is absolutely an incredible artist.
That's sort of grew up, and Carl Larsson was a friend of Zorn, and he was a painter, much more sort of Jugend, Art Nouveau, a lot of watercolors. But his house, which is a very famous museum, is just 4 kilometers from our summer house in Sweden. So my brothers used to work there as guides. And in that museum, you also have a lot of Zorn etchings and sculptures because they were good friends. So, Zorn, of course, is also very important. But there's so many painters that I admire and look at. And it depends a bit, I love Daubigny, his landscapes, and Corot, of course, but a lot of other landscape paintings and still lifes. There are also so many good ones. Early on, I was extremely fascinated by Chardin. I loved to look at Chardin's still lifes. And Willem Kalf, the Dutch, which you have some beautiful ones in the Rijksmuseum too, 17th century, which is also fantastic. A bit less, Heida and some of those other Dutch 17th century still life painters, I find a bit cool, and it's not really. I admire them, but they're masterpieces. But it's not something that I admire a lot. But and then with figures and portraits and other things, there's so many. Titian, of course, amazing, and so many painters in the 17th century. I did when I first came to Amsterdam. I wasn't allowed to copy in the Rijksmuseum wherever, so I went with an American friend to Antwerp. So I copied a Van Dyck there, which I have on top of my wall. And then a few years later, I had a portrait.
Which one did you copy? Which Van Dyck? Was it the self-portrait?
Martin Pijpen. He was a friend of his, bearded guy.
Okay.
Pepijn.
I'm not sure if I know that one.
And then a couple of years later, I had a portrait commission in Madrid, and I copied half days. I copied in the Prado. So I copied this. I wanted to copy Velázquez, but I wasn't allowed to. So I copied a big Van Dyck, the Musico.
Oh, they have that amazing one of Rijkaard's in the
this
Prado,
hangs next door. The Rijkaard I could have copied too, but it was on panel and it was extremely dirty, super yellow. So I thought no.
I think that's one of his best portraits, though. I love that one. There's an intimacy that you don't often see in a Van Dyck. There's sort of you can tell that he was a very good friend of Van Dyck. There's this like intimacy, that relationship that he has with the sitter that you can see. And it's also strange because he's got an arm missing as well. So it's kind of.
Yeah, he was a one-armed painter. There are lots of his paintings in the Uffizi in Florence, Martin Rijkaard.
Was he a one-arm painter? Did
he
that
had
happen?
one arm. He painted with his other arm.
Wow.
Incredible. He died sort of 2 months after the portrait was painted, I think.
Yeah, was he ill when that portrait was painted?
No, so Van Dyck is also, and Velázquez, of course. So when I was copying this huge Musico by Van Dyck, I took breaks and of course walked upstairs to look at the other Velázquez.
How were you able to do the master copy? Do you just apply, or is there?
I applied.
And do they ask to see your work? Like, is the application complicated, or?
There were back then. This was in '93, I think. There were 20 or 25 painters or people copying in the museum. It's amazing. And I had lunch a lot of times with a bombero, and that's a fireman. He spent all his free time copying in the Prado just to learn how to paint.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
No, so
it would be almost. It would be quite difficult to do a copy now because it's so packed. The Prado.
Yeah.
Every time I go.
Yeah. No,
I've been twice.
Yeah. And then, it's a lot of the, Frans Hals has also some amazing paintings. He's a bit uneven, but when he's good, he's really good. And Rubens has done amazing paintings. There's just so many. Every century has such a great many fantastic painters. And 18th century, of course, you have also a lot of great British painters and Gilbert Stuart, the American painter, and I actually did recently I did a commission of an ambassador, American ambassador, former ambassador to Slovak Republic. Under Obama, he was ambassador. And his forefather was painted by Gilbert Stuart.
Oh, wow. So you
I didn't know about, but unbelievable portrait. So that was fun to have, to have a back in my mind when I was painting this guy.
Wow. So he came from a long line of sort of ambassadors or people that worked in the government.
Yeah, well, he had been a businessman, so he, like it is in the States, and he had worked a lot for the Democratic Party and so on. So he was became ambassador there. Yeah, no, so that's great. So a lot of the 18th century paintings too, and 19th century, and 19th century you have so many good paintings too. And I love Sorolla, and the museum in Madrid is fantastic. His house, that's a proper studio too, amazing studio. And Sargent, of course, is always great inspiration and a great admiration for him. He, as any painter, you can be uneven, but I think he's amazing. Amazing.
I think Sargent's probably one of the most consistent painters of all time.
Yeah.
I've hardly seen anything that's bad of Sargent's. What you were talking about Rembrandt, his early work was quite sort of crude. And you think, really, is this Rembrandt? Like, how does he get to become the great Rembrandt? But Sargent from early on was just amazing, from the get-go. His very early, even his sketches when he was a teenager are incredible. So yeah, I mean, I've probably one of the most consistent.
Yeah, and I think also, he's a sort of modern painter. So for painters of today, there are a lot of lessons you can learn from him. I remember the big, huge exhibition in 1990 in London, which I saw the exhibition, I think 4 or 5 times. But I did, I took a lot of notes, and I started to study just different aspects of his work, and so you can learn a lot from it. It's easy to learn from him. Learn from Rembrandt is, I mean, I wouldn't be able to copy a late Rembrandt, would be nearly impossible.
I tried copying the Apostle Paul and failed miserably because he's just he's so difficult to copy. It's such an eccentric painter.
Yeah, he does things with oil paint which nobody's ever done. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, over the years, I've experimented with the kind of glazing that he would have done. There's a lot of glazing, there's a lot of impasto, but it's very, very difficult to even get close to what he was doing. Whereas Sargent, he's much more sort of, you can touch what he's doing and be in touch with how he was painting and things.
Yeah.
He's much more modern in that respect.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
I remember when I went in 2015, I went to, was the last time I was in Amsterdam, and I went to the Rijksmuseum, and there was firstly, I saw the Frans Hals, the massive Frans Hals pieces that they have next to the Night Watch there, which I was so surprised because I'd only seen Frans Hals in books, and I didn't realize how much of he's very, very good painter, very accomplished painter. And they're very impressive paintings, very detailed. Some of his late paintings are very sloppy, but those paintings are incredibly good technically. And also there was the Claudius Civilis painting was there at the time because they were reconstructing the National Gallery of Sweden. Yeah. And so they'd lent the Claudius Civilis painting to the Rijksmuseum, and I wasn't expecting it to be hung there. And it was hung opposite the Apostle Paul. And it glowed like I'd never seen anything like it. It's one of my favorite Rembrandt paintings. It's like this incredible glow of like yellow gold coming at you. It's just the most amazing.
Crazy. And I saw it. I was in Stockholm last weekend. So I saw it. I saw it again. I mean, I always go there and see it. It is, but you can go to the city hall, now the palace in Amsterdam, where it was hung, so where it was hung, and it was pretty far up. and it was much bigger, of course. The painting was huge. It was cut off a lot.
Yeah, it's been cut down to it's smaller.
There's a lot of weird stuff in that painting, I think. I mean, there's some fantastic silhouettes, but I think the effect of it would have been, you know, much better hung
high up.
The place where it was.
It's like very, very thickly painted and very crudely painted as well. And some
of those heads are crazy on the
crazy
side.
Yeah, crazy, with like lipstick, you know, sort of slashed on one of the, you know, they look like a freak show.
No, that's true.
Listen, it's been so wonderful, Urban, talking to you about art and about our favorite artists and everything like this. And hopefully I'll be in Amsterdam soon, and I'll come and do another.
Why did you call me in 2015?
Well, I think you were busy painting the Queen.
Oh, no.
Anyway, listen, it's been wonderful, and let's do it again soon. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Take care, Urban.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.